Well, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. My name is Andrew Reynolds. I'm the Chair of Global Studies here at UNC and the Director of this fledgling Institute on LGBT representation and rights. And this is our second event, and we're exceptionally excited to have old friends and new friends joining us on the panel today for a conversation about the future of LGBT rights in the United States. I also have the great pleasure of introducing our mayor, the mayor of Chapel Hill, Mark Kleinschmidt, who will do us the honor of introducing our panelists. So thank you.
I have to confess, I have all kinds of butterflies in my tummy right now. I'm so excited about this panel. I have a council meeting in an hour and a half, but who cares? So I'm thrilled. I want, and not only to be here to hear this conversation, but to welcome all of you. I know that we have friends from all across, at least from as far away as the district. Thank you. Welcome to Chapel Hill and everyone else, and also from as far away as Durham. Did I say that right? Love Durham. We're just thrilled that the Institute is operating here at Chapel Hill, and I want to thank Andrew for the opportunity to introduce you to extraordinary individuals who I'm sure are going to provide a great deal of insight into the future of, I'll say mine, because I'm not sure how many of you are our, but my community, the LGBT community in America. And if you're a member of it, you can say mine too. First, all the way from Durham, the other university in the Triangle. Janie is the director of the Center for LGBT Life at Duke University. She began working on LGBTQ issues at the University of Georgia. I'm sure quite challenging, at least that's what we would imagine, where she helped develop a safe space training and provided leadership for statewide Beyond Tolerance conferences. Currently, she serves as a fellow at the Rockway Institute for LGBT Research and Public Policy and is a member of the editorial board of the Journal for GLBT Family Studies. Welcome to Chapel Hill.
Thank you.
Now, Janie, I haven't started following you on Twitter yet, but sitting next to you is someone who I've followed for quite some time, and I've really enjoyed the Twitter comments. Jonathan Capehart is a member of the Washington Post editorial board and writes about politics and social issues for the Post-Partisan blog. He is also an MSNBC contributor, appearing regularly on Morning Joe and other daytime programs. Prior to joining the Post in 2007, Jonathan was deputy editor of the New York Daily News' editorial page from 2002 to 2005, and he has also worked at the global public relations company Hill & Knowlton as a policy advisor to Michael Bloomberg in his successful campaign for mayor of New York City. Capehart and the Daily News editorial board won the 1999 Pulitzer for editorial writing for their series on the Apollo Theater in Harlem. And in 2011, Capehart was an esteemed honoree, a distinction given to individuals in recognition of efforts in supporting the African American and LGBT communities. Welcome to Chapel Hill, Jonathan. And our next guest is someone I just started following this afternoon on Twitter. But while I haven't spent a lot of time reading his tweets yet, I have spent many years reading columns. I'd like to welcome Frank Bruni, an op-ed columnist for the New York Times since June 2011. He joined the newspaper in 1995. Over his years at the Times, he has worn a wide variety of hats, including chief restaurant critic from June 2004 through August 2009, and Rome bureau chief from 2002 to 2004. He has also written 2 New York Times bestsellers, a memoir, Born Round, that was published by Penguin Press in 2009, and Ambling into History, a chronicle of George W. Bush's campaign for the presidency, published by HarperCollins in 2002. And welcome to Chapel Hill.
So good afternoon. I do want to say a word of thanks to Andy Reynolds for inviting me here to join you. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. So we have about 40 minutes that I get to keep you all to myself. And then at that point, we're going to turn you over to everybody else, okay?
Sure.
So I think quite obviously, lots of people were speculating about the Supreme Court decisions and what's going to happen related to Prop 8 and DOMA. And I'm wondering how each of you thinks that that narrative is going to unfold.
I'm going to defer to the alum. I'll answer, but...
Okay.
I don't have specific predictions. I would say a couple of things. I would say one is there's this impulse, this hunger to analyze the Supreme Court the way we analyze a lot of other, the Senate, the House, whatever, and they have proven over time to be much more cryptic and much less easily analyzed. If you think back to the last Supreme Court decision that everyone was waiting for, in a similarly breathless way, it was the Obamacare decision, and I don't remember a lot of predictions that captured that exact outcome with Justice Roberts doing what he did for the reasons he cited. So I think it's a little bit of a fool's game to read into that very short period of question and answer that we got to see publicly and try to guess what's going to happen. I prefer to take a long view, which is that I think whatever happens with the court is not going to change what's going to happen or what is happening and will continue to happen for the next 5 to 10 years. I think it would be great if the court validated what had happened so far, maybe accelerated it, but I prefer not to put all of my chips on the Supreme Court, and I think the great news is we don't need to. Even if they make a decision that is, in my view, unjust, a decision that seems discordant with the times, I think we don't need to despair because I think people are moving so quickly, particularly generationally. The trend lines are so clear, and so I prefer to look beyond the Supreme Court decision.
The coverage of the Supreme Court hearings the weekend, say the Friday leading up to the arguments on Tuesday, Wednesday, were so triumphant. The Supreme Court's going to hear the cases, this is a great moment, oh, we're going to win, this is fantastic, how could they not? And I started feeling really uncomfortable. Because, that's just not how the Supreme Court works. And, to Frank's point, I remember after the arguments, over 2 days for Obamacare, over 2 days. After the first day, people were calling for the Solicitor General to be fired because he threw the case.
Right.
And everyone kept saying that it's going to be declared unconstitutional after those arguments, and we now know what happened. And so I wrote a piece for the Monday of that week of the DOMA and Prop 8 hearing saying, slow your roll. The Supreme Court's going to hear these cases. Any number of things could happen. Personally, I'd be thrilled, but I'd be very surprised if the Supreme Court gave Ted Olson what he really wants in the Prop 8 case, which is sort of this cosmic, global, constitutional right to marry. I think from just the questions that we heard, that there clearly is some discomfort on the court, or at least it sounds like, and from what I've heard around town in Washington, that the court hates having to deal with this right now. So you could see a situation where marriage is legal in California. Maybe they say Prop 8, the lower court ruling stands. Maybe in DOMA, I've sort of gotten ahead of myself. We could see a situation where Prop 8 is invalidated and DOMA falls, but not because of some grand vision of LGBT equality. It could be on technical issues. They could say that the folks in Prop 8 who brought the Prop 8 case don't have standing, and therefore the lower court ruling stands. In DOMA, they could just say it's a states' rights thing, and the federal government trampled on states' rights by defining what marriage is. And that would be great for the community, but it says nothing. The court doesn't have to say anything about, same-sex couples, their dignity, the accountability for their families. In the way, say, in the Lawrence, the Lawrence v. Texas decision, which was written by Justice Kennedy, which I remember when it came out, I think it was 2003, And I remember this because it was the same day as Mayor Bloomberg's gay pride reception in New York, and everyone was bouncing off the walls because the Supreme Court of the United States spoke so glowingly and affirmingly of lesbian and gay people that, people were just floating on air. I don't know if we're going to get that.
I think one other thing I would say also, no matter what happens, the week of coverage that Jonathan, I think, wisely alluded to, is a win-win situation. I don't think before, the media's coverage of that was so saturation, so intense. I've never seen, for a period of several days, coverage of an LGBT issue that was that broad and deep. I think a lot of Americans, we forget this, probably everyone in this room is very engaged. I don't think a lot of Americans understood what DOMA made unjust for people. I don't think they understood the Edie Windsors of the world. And I think regardless of what happens, there was a public education that happened around those days. And it was also a moment for temperature taking that was extraordinary, because it was in those days or right after those days that you had people like Bill O'Reilly, people like Glenn Beck, people like Rush Limbaugh saying, this is over. I mean, essentially, they're saying, like, maybe it's not over, meaning discrimination in a two-tiered society. Everyone sort of, there was a temperature taking and this sort of widespread acknowledgement, even among opponents of marriage equality, that we've moved to a place, we're not moving back, and we're only going forward. I think that's an extremely positive development.
There is an exception, Rick Santorum, it's a shocker, who told the Des Moines Register on Monday that it would be suicidal for the Republican Party to change its position on same-sex marriage. And this flies in the face of everything that we know. In the Washington Post ABC News poll, the highest percentage of support for marriage equality, 58%. 52% of Republicans ages 18 to 49 support marriage equality. So Rick Santorum is talking, I don't know where he's talking.
He's a volitional dinosaur.
Yeah, but here's the thing about Santorum that sort of concerns me, but I think should concern the Republican Party. The Republican Party has this tradition. The guy who ran the last time gets the nomination the next time. That's what happened with George H.W. Bush. That's what happened with John McCain. That's what happened with Mitt Romney. Arguably, the last man standing in the Republican contest of 2012 was Rick Santorum. So if he runs again, he could possibly win again.
He won't.
I hope you're right, but if he does...
And you're right about the general temperature of the Republican Party, but George W. Bush was not the last man standing. So we have a recent exception to the rule, and I think if you really kind of talk to the money people in the Republican Party, and that's what ultimately matters, none of the money people want to line up behind Rick Santorum. The changes in that RNC autopsy that they did, where they want to diminish, they want to squeeze the primary schedule tighter, they want to do fewer debates, that's all about making it easier for the money candidate, the Romney, who, as far to the right as he packed, was the moderate in that field. Well, I mean, that's
right.
So if you look at what the party establishment, for lack of a better word, if you look at what the money people want, they want to make sure there is no Rick Santorum. I would be shocked if he was the nominee in 2006.
I would be too, but I'd be like this.
So both of you touched on things I wanted to ask, and I'm torn about which way to go, but I'm going to stick with the Republicans right now. So there's been a lot of evolving lately, right? And some of that comes from Democrats, some of that comes from Republicans. Probably we tend to be more surprised about the Republicans. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Are the Republicans really coming to the table? Or is this mostly an effort to keep the younger vote and to build their future? And if they're not really coming to the table, how do you think that tactic is going to play out in the long run?
Well, I think well, it depends on which Republicans you're talking about.
Right.
So the ones who wrote the Republican autopsy, they're all about let's evolve already, not because we're for gay rights, but because that's where the young people are. And if we're going to be attractive to young people, this is a way to do it, through gay rights. But then you have other Republicans who are there on the issue. There's, how many people are on that amicus brief now? It's up to 100 and, last time, yeah, 130 something.
Scores, yeah.
Yeah. So those are folks who truly believe that the party needs to evolve and needs to advance on the issue of LGBT equality. You have, I think Rob Portman, Senator Portman, should be considered sort of a hero on the right for doing what he did. It's unfortunate that there aren't other Republicans in the Senate besides Mark Kirk who are willing to join him. But I do think because of demographics, because of, this is to be in favor of marriage equality and LGBT rights, is to be on the right side of history. Eventually the Republican Party will get there. It's just a matter of how long that will take.
Jonathan mentioned Mark Kirk, who's the only one in the Senate since Rob Portman. And Mark Kirk, interestingly, is not someone who's planning on running, to my knowledge, or anyone's knowledge, for another term. I mention that because the answer when it comes to the Republican Party is the Republican Party has an enormous problem right now. Because for all of the people who signed that amicus brief and all the people who signed off on that autopsy report and who want to see the party become a little bit less hidebound to the right, a little bit more modern, right now there's a dynamic in Republican politics where in order to get to the Senate or to get to the House, you have to get through a primary. And the Republican Party nationally and the Republican Party that wants to be competitive in presidential elections is completely different from the base in a lot of states that elects the person who becomes the candidate to go against a Democrat. And the problem right now with what's going to happen, what's kind of really going to slow down the Republican Party's embrace of same-sex marriage or other LGBT issues is the number of candidates in the Republican Party that have to worry about getting through that primary. That's why you see almost everybody in the Senate, almost all the Senate Republicans who you saw stepping up saying we want to filibuster even a debate about new gun controls. Those are people who are thinking about the dynamics in their home states, not about broader national issues. And until that changes, there are a bunch of issues the Republican Party is not going to progress, evolve, whatever verb you want to use, as quickly as I think the kind of saner, larger minds in the party would like them to.
Thank you. So Frank, you mentioned the national spotlight that was shone around the Supreme Court. And my sense is that there are a lot of people in the LGBTQ movement who are pretty frustrated with the amount of attention, both nationally and across states, on same-sex marriage. And we all know that once the questions of same-sex marriage get settled, there's still a lot of discrimination yet to be dealt with, and certainly employment non-discrimination. And so I wonder if you believe that the national media is, I would say, both prepared for and inclined to shine a spotlight on these other forms of discrimination in any way like they've shone a spotlight on same-sex marriage.
She did say Frank.
I think it's going to be harder to get a spotlight on those issues because they're literally less sexy. Same-sex marriage, marriage equality is a very, very sexy issue. And the media responds to what, is sort of sexy. I think it's going to be hard too because I think in some sense the media is going to be a little bit exhausted with the attention that's paid to this. They're always moving on to something new, and although it is a different set of concerns that involves the same population, I think it's going to rely a lot on how effectively the advocates in this situation, how effectively they spotlight stories of discrimination. The media often reports on what is made easy for them to report. And so you can really have an enormous, if you have your case histories and your human interest stories teed up and ready to go, and they're good ones. Edie Windsor was a godsend to the marriage equality. You could not have You could not have gone to central casting and gotten someone for that. I mean, God bless you.
Lauren McCall.
And so some of it will boil down to that. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think the more interesting question is if at whatever point it seems like marriage equality is on an inexorable roll or whatever, will we turn back to ENDA? What happened to ENDA? You know, and a lot of that's going to depend not on the media but on advocates in the movement and what they want to spend their money and or energy on.
Yeah, I mean, Frank is right. I mean, we're all about the shiny object, and the shiny object is marriage equality. Although, I mean, if the movement does what Frank advises, which is, you know, the advocates must sort of get ready for post-Supreme Court, post-marriage equality, and to make it easy for us put upon journalists to tell the story. You can get over sort of the gay fatigue, if you will. I mean,
the story's written up.
Right. I mean, we went through Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the whole drama of ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and almost immediately moved into you know, court cases on Prop 8 and DOMA. What helped was, you know, court rulings coming seemingly every quarter or every like half year. There'd be some spark that would get us, you know, going again and talking about this. Oh, and also controversy. And that's the other thing, the controversial subject. But once we get past Prop 8 and DOMA, meaning the Supreme Court decisions, and you know, there will still be work that will need to be done on both those things. I think no matter what the Supreme Court does, then it's going to be incumbent upon advocates and those of us in the press who care about these issues to keep going, to say to people, okay, marriage isn't the be-all and end-all. There are a whole lot of other things. I mean, I'm already getting pitched by people saying, hey, yeah, I know you're focused on marriage, but you know, because there's no ENDA, I mean,
does everybody know what ENDA is? When we say ENDA, no? It just refers to, yeah. It's the Employment Non-Discrimination. It's a federal, a lot of people don't realize, because we just kind of assume, since we're talking about marriage equality, which would seem to be the next step, that on the federal level, there is no legal protection against somebody who is fired for sexual orientation. A lot of states have that legal protection. Most cities, most cosmopolitan cities do. But there are obviously whole sections of the country that are uncovered because unless there's a federal law comparable to the Civil Rights Act, you have nothing. And it's interesting because I myself forget that this doesn't exist because it feels like we've gone to Part B, marriage, and Part A was never accomplished. But anyway, so when you hear us say ENDA, that's what ENDA
And
means.
isn't that also true with housing? I mean, there's basically no constitutional, no specific
There's no federal
constitutional
housing,
protection.
those normal
Housing
things that are
for-
covered by discrimination, anti-discrimination laws, housing,
Most
employment,
Americans,
public accommodations, yeah.
most Americans don't know that. They're shocked.
Right.
They don't know.
I'm going to switch to a different topic and let folks come back to that if they want to. But I think you both acknowledged just before we came in that you heard that there's been a slight political shift in the state of North Carolina. And so my question to you is, how do you think nationally North Carolina is viewed related to LGBTQ rights, and what advice would you have for us moving forward?
I went first.
No, I know, I was about to say, I'll go. Well, I mean, when Amendment 1 was happening, gosh, was that last year?
Yes.
Yeah, about a year ago.
It was like April or May.
It was May.
It was right before,
2012.
it was May and then like a week later, Obama.
Right.
Yeah,
A few days, the day after.
He re-evolved.
Right. So, I was talking to, and I'm sure Frank was talking to folks as well, where people were saying, it's not looking good. And Amendment 1's going to happen. And I don't think a lot of people thought it would happen. So I don't think North Carolina, y'all here in North Carolina are, behind in April. I think that folks were hoping that what they thought would happen wouldn't happen. I do think that what then ended up happening in November the 3 states, Maine, Maryland, Washington, and then Minnesota rejecting a constitutional amendment. And now what's happening in Delaware, Illinois, and I know I'm missing another state. Yeah, Hawaii is another one.
I always lose this list too.
Yeah. But there's momentum there. And I think...
Rhode Island.
Yes, Rhode Island.
Sorry.
And so there's momentum there, and I guess the key lesson is not to give up. I mean, think about Maryland. New York State, Andrew Cuomo, pushed hard in the first 6 months, got marriage equality done. Martin O'Malley governor of Maryland, was trying to do the same thing. He failed. Well, for Martin O'Malley, that was also a problem because he wants to run for president. Andrew Cuomo wants to run for president, so that's a whole other discussion. But what Martin O'Malley did was take a page out of Andrew's book, take personal ownership of it, and push it through. The lesson in that is just because you've been defeated once doesn't mean you sit back and not try to do it again. And so I think the lesson is to keep pushing and to know that because of the momentum happening all over the country, that there are people out there who would want to help you in any way possible to make push North Carolina on the right side of history.
I think Jonathan's right. The issue is this is changing so rapidly right now that I think to assume that what happened in one year, be it 2010 or 2012, to assume that's going to have direct bearing on what could happen in 2014 or 2015, I don't think is correct. That said, I would like to see the movement, for lack of a better word, be pretty careful about what it puts to the test in the coming years. Because I do think the trend line only goes in one direction. I do think we're going to get a bunch more states. But having gone through that electric and extremely helpful moment on November 6th, where all 4 states came down the right way, I think it would be prudent not to put a lot of firepower in a state where there's not a good chance of victory, because I think it would be nice for the trajectory in the narrative to keep racking up victories and not get mired in one that ends up in a defeat. So I think North Carolina is changing as fast as the country, but given that that was a 60-40 thing, I wouldn't want to see anything come to the ballot here for a number of years yet.
So both of you have written about the importance of visibility in terms of moving the movement forward. And so I'd like to turn it a little personal with this question. Could you talk a little bit about how your own visibility has influenced your families, your career, your lives?
I don't know, but go.
I've been visible, or at least open, since I was a freshman here at Carolina. And initially, I'd love to say that initially that was a humanitarian and political decision. But no, I mean, it became one over time, I mean, to use much too grandiose language. But I mean, for me, it was a simple matter at that point in time. Like, I did not want to hide who I was from anybody. I did not want to have any sort of friendships that were predicated on a secret or a lie. And I just kind of felt like it made more sense to live life in an honest way. And anyone who had a problem with me, that was fine. I mean, over time, as I ended up moving into journalism, I realized that if I were willing to carry that honesty to another level, I could actually talk to people about this in a more political sense. And so, from the time I was a student here forward, when I had the opportunity, I would write in the first person about these sorts of issues. I believe very, very strongly, and Rob Portman's an example of this, and I'm sorry if he got some of the blowback he did, because I think it was unfair. I believe very strongly the way we change people is to let them understand an issue not in an abstract way, but let them understand that it affects them. And I've always felt in my own life that everyone I'm honest with, who decides they like me rather than dislike me, is going to rethink what they think of gay people. And that's true across the board. And just since I mentioned Rob Portman, I just want to say there were a lot of people who were not Republicans, and I think we live in a very partisan world where you want to criticize anybody on the other side of the divide, who said, well, that is just disgusting. It took his son to come to the right. Well, you know what? Almost everybody came to this whenever they came to it for personal reasons. And the whole cri de coeur of the movement for ages was, come out wherever you are, people were being outed years ago on the theory that until you understood that you knew gay people, you wouldn't embrace them. So if we understood human nature like that 10 years ago, and then it bears fruit in Rob Portman to turn around and say, you should have been here without a personal connection, is to be a little bit not fair.
Exactly. I thought, excuse me, that, you know, Rob Portman, what he did was so startling, shocking even, that, you know, I wrote a piece very quickly congratulating him, and then wrote another piece congratulating him and his son for what they did. You know, I know this is the personal question. I sort of, in college, I went to Carleton in Minnesota, and I came out in my sophomore year. My best friend was the only openly gay person on campus. And so I basically sort of used my friendship with him to basically be like, hey, my best friend is gay. So draw your conclusion. I got home from college, and in that sort of coming out conversation with my mother, sort of maneuvered her into asking me whether I was gay, and finally said, yes, I am. And then her first words to me were, don't tell anybody. And I said, Mom, are you crazy? I mean, I can't hide if I wanted to. So, and I, like Frank, I decided then, because she was so afraid, you know, oh, it'll hurt your career. And I said, Mom, I can't hide. I feel like I have a big neon gay sign over my head, so why not live my life as an out person? And it always shocks me, it continues to shock me when, you know, I will say something about my ex-partner Giuseppe, or I will say, you know, as a gay person, you know, either in print, like Frank, in the first person, or on television, and I will get an email or a tweet or a Facebook message from someone saying, oh my God, you're gay? With Twitter, it's great because people then respond saying, you're joking, right? You know, like Frank, I sort of feel like an ambassador of sorts, that when you know that, you know, I'm a gay man who's, you know, doing reasonably okay in a career and writing and doing what he loves, that the same thing can happen to you. So, but the one area where my coming out didn't have an impact was, again, my mother, who, and actually I wrote about this about Portman. It took Rob Portman 2 years from the time his son came out to the time he came out for marriage equality. It took my mother 22 years to make that transition. So she was fine. She eventually, you know, became okay with my being gay. Didn't hurt to take her to Italy to meet Giuseppe's parents, but that's a whole other thing.
It's the food that always gets
right. Yeah. So, but it wasn't until President Obama said he was for same-sex marriage that my mother changed. It was over Mother's Day brunch, and she said, okay, now tell me, what's the difference between marriage and civil unions, and why is that important? And I explained it to her, and she said, well, that's just cruel. Someone can just come in and take someone's things, kick them out of their home because they're not married. Oh, that's not right. You should be able to get married. And I sat there slouched on. I've been writing about this for years. But I'm not President Obama. And you know, people wonder if President Obama has a power over African Americans, and particularly little old lady African Americans. My mother's a prime example. They can do no wrong. If he says it's the way to go, she's for it. If Michelle Obama wears it, she wants it.
You mentioned your mother said no. I just have to say this about my mother. She didn't say tell no one. She said tell no one in the family. And my freshman year, there was a series of phone calls with my mother calling me and saying, I told your brother Mark, I took care of that. And then a couple of weeks later, I told your brother Harry, and on and on. And I realized my mother was my personal India. I outsourced coming out.
It's interesting how similar your stories are to stories that I still hear today. So let's imagine, let's play pretend. Let's pretend that discrimination...
I'm not addressing anything strange for this, too.
Let's pretend that we have an accepting environment, that a lot of the discrimination goes away. So what holds together the movement then? You know, a lot of our identity has been built around identity politics, around our shared consciousness of discrimination. So as those things start to ebb away, I'm particularly interested in your thoughts about how we could prepare the younger members of the community to move into roles of leadership, and what would they lead?
Well, I don't think, I mean, the movement never ends. I mean, just look at, you know, African Americans and racism and discrimination. I mean, we're still fighting that. And I think the same thing will be the case for the LGBT community. I mean, as we get older, the next generation comes up, and then you guys in the next generation are going to have to teach the generation that follows you. I mean, it's not something that people are born and they are, you know, wholly loving and accepting. Well, maybe when they're born, but then all sorts of other stuff happens and sort of knocks them off track. But there's going to be an ongoing education effort in the same way that African Americans are still trying to get people to understand, you know, what racism does to the community when it comes to housing and jobs and law enforcement. I mean, there are examples every day of why the struggle continues, and the struggle will continue for the LGBT community. It just might be less than what it is.
I would say, I mean, part of my answer is there's a kind of semantic question. I don't know that it will be in this fantasy future. I don't know that we can call it a movement at that point, because what's it moving toward, you know? As far as community goes, I mean, in a lot of ways, the word community doesn't sit well with me right now, because I feel like we're so diverse. And when someone says to me, who are you? Or someone said to me, give me 5 adjectives that describe who you are, I actually don't know that I'd say gay first. And I don't know in the future that I'd want someone else to say gay or lesbian or trans or whatever first, because I think what defines us as people is so much bigger than that. But I think we will remain a minority, and the minority experience is always what it is, even in the presence of fair laws. And I think there will be a bond and a kinship among people who recognize that they are different in some way, in a way that human beings aren't measured rightly or wrongly. And I think that will always be a sort of fluid. And, you know, little boys will always wonder, why am I listening to Barbra Streisand?
So what are, let's go beyond ENDA, because we talked about that. So what are the next great frontiers?
I think right now you're seeing the syllable trans a lot more than you used to. And I actually think it's going to be an interesting couple of years because just recently GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, made a formal announcement that they were going to put a lot more energy than they have into the trans issue. I've seen echoes of that elsewhere. I think that's partly a barometer of how confident people are that the marriage equality fight and other things are going in the right direction. And I think it's going to be interesting to see in the next couple of years, because I don't know what's going to happen, whether the T in LGBT raises as much money, commands as much enthusiasm, gets as much support. And my predictions are going to be a couple of moments of friction where that becomes a sort of a test of self-definition in the coming years.
Yeah, I agree with Frank. And I think that, especially around the time when ENDA came up in 2007, when they were trying to do the all-inclusive And
people against the trans, right?
right, again, against the trans, because the thinking was, well, why are we going to derail this bill we've been trying to get passed for years? Because, you know, this minority within the minority wants it. We can get this done if we just take it out. I think part of what the T in the LGBT community has to do, it's not only sort of raise the money and things that Frank talked about, but just be, I mean, again, be more visible. I mean, there might be one or two people, and I can't name a transgender, with the exception of Robin, who's the leader of Outserve SLDN, Service Members Legal Defense Network, which did a lot of work on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But there's going to need to be more Robins out there working the halls of Congress, district offices, putting a face to the T. Lesbians and gay men have been doing it for decades now, since the Stonewall riots in the 60s. Transgender folks are going to have to do the same thing. It's not going to, I think it's going to be longer than a couple of years. It's going to be a very long time, because I think there's friction within the gay community about whether, I've heard people say, why is the T even there? So there's work that has to be done within our own community before we then ask the larger community for acceptance.
Thank you all for coming and being part of this conversation, which we see as an ongoing conversation. And especially I'd like to thank Janie from Duke. I hope this is the beginning of a really serious collaboration on these issues, and we can show how warring tribes can come together. But of course, mostly and finally, it's very important that we thank Frank and Jonathan, who have inspired and taught us and entertained us, not just this evening, but throughout their work for many years now. I know they're iconic in the field, and it's really a pleasure having them on campus, so thank you so much.